So, what if war isn't really just about what we see on the news? The flags, the borders, the political speeches? What if it's also about a single financial signal, timed so perfectly it shifts billions of dollars literally minutes before the world changes forever? Today, we're just following the data. We're going to break down a massive geopolitical event, not by looking at military strategy, but by auditing a financial scandal that connects unimaginable wealth to the precise timing of a war.
And this is the number that kicks the whole thing off. $1.5 billion. I mean, it's a staggering amount of money, and it's the very beginning of our investigation.
And look, this wasn't somebody just buying a bunch of stock. This was a really sophisticated, complex financial move. It was engineered to cash in on a very specific future event. And a move like that requires an insane amount of confidence. Or, maybe something a little more concrete than just confidence.
Now, this is where it gets really hard to ignore. This entire massive trade was done, dusted, and completed just 13 minutes before a presidential announcement that sent absolute shockwaves through the global markets. The timing is, well, it's almost too perfect to be believed.
So that leaves us with the big question, right? Was this just the luckiest, most brilliantly timed trade in the history of finance? Or was it a signal, proof that somebody, somewhere, knew exactly what was about to happen and placed their bets accordingly?
Okay, so let's get into our first section and really see how this all played out. We're starting with the trade itself. The goal here is to follow the money, minute by minute, in that super critical window right before the news hit the public. The speed here is just incredible. Let's walk through this. At 6:49 in the morning, Eastern Time, the trade kicks off, a huge buy of S&P 500 futures, and at the same time, a massive sale of oil futures. Just 2 minutes later, by 6:51, the entire thing is done. The whole $1.5 billion play is complete. And then, silence for 13 minutes. At 7:04 a.m., President Trump posts on Truth Social, and the markets go wild, in the exact way this trade was set up to profit from.
So what was this trade exactly? In financial forensics, they call this a paired move. Let's break that down. It's not one bet, it's two opposite bets, made at the exact same time. In this case, buying stocks while selling oil. It's a strategy that just screams that you know something, because you're not just betting on one thing to happen. You're betting on two completely different markets to move in opposite directions, all based on a single piece of information.
And this chart just shows you the payoff. The second the announcement went public, oil prices completely tanked, while S&P 500 futures jumped up 4%. The trade wasn't just right, it was perfectly right, in two opposite directions at the exact same time.
And listen, we're not just guessing here. Experts who spend their lives analyzing these kinds of patterns saw a massive red flag. As UCLA law professor Andrew Verstein put it, this pattern perfectly mirrors informed trading by government officials. The takeaway is that this looked a lot less like a lucky guess and a lot more like a move based on critical, non-public information.
So how in the world was a trade this profitable even possible? Well, that brings us to our next section, the information gap. This is all about the massive difference between what the public was hearing about peace talks and the totally different military reality that was being planned in secret.
This slide really lays it all out. On one side, you've got the public story. All the headlines were talking about ceasefire plans and diplomatic de-escalation. But on the other side, that was the military reality, active planning for total war, including things like surprise decapitation strikes. This wasn't just a small difference in tone. The gap between hoping for a deal and planning for total obliteration was a trader's dream signal. So while the world was hearing about diplomacy, this is what was actually being planned behind closed doors. The goals for Operation Epic Fury, as you can see, they weren't about talking. They were about the total neutralization of missile capabilities and the annihilation of the Iranian Navy. The distance between the public words and the private plans was just immense.
So that information gap, it created the perfect opportunity for that first big trade. But the data shows this probably wasn't a one-time thing. The same kind of pattern is popping up in a new, mostly unregulated space, the digital casino. Here's where we see how secret intelligence can basically be laundered on these new prediction markets.
Because a lot of these markets run on the blockchain, they leave a public record of all the bets. And the footprints are just wild. Take a user called MAGA Man, who made over $500,000 betting on the death of Iran's supreme leader, and that bet was placed just 71 minutes before the news broke.
Or look at this cluster of 38 accounts, which was probably just one person that cleared over $2 million by perfectly predicting the exact date of the February 28th strikes. And then there's Burdensome Mix, a wallet that turned about 38 grand into almost $500,000 betting on the capture of President Maduro. Come on, these aren't just lucky guesses. This is a clear pattern.
So how do they do this without setting off all the alarm bells? Well, they use techniques like wallet splitting. It's pretty simple, really. You just take one huge bet and you chop it up across dozens, maybe hundreds of tiny little accounts. It's a trick designed specifically to fly under the radar of regulators. You're basically hiding in plain sight.
Now, this isn't just a story about some clever traders making a fortune. There are serious, real-world consequences to all of this. So let's turn to the actual physical impact of the conflict, the global supply shock.
The military strikes and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that followed, it basically took almost half of the Persian Gulf's oil production off the world market. This chart just makes it painfully clear. Saudi Arabia's production down by a third. The UAE down over 34%. Kuwait down 36%. I mean, this is a massive slice of the world's energy supply just disappearing, almost overnight.
And beyond the economic shock, the environmental cost was just devastating. The strikes on the oil facilities led to something that became known as the Black Rain over Tehran, a toxic cloud from burning depots that released carcinogens like benzene and toluene, poisoning the water and the soil for who knows how long.
So you've got this massive profiteering scandal set against a backdrop of global chaos. You know it was only a matter of time before Washington reacted. And that brings us to our last section, the legislative backlash, and the really tough question of whether Congress can actually stop people from turning conflict into a commodity.
So in response, a few key laws have been proposed. You've got the Bets Off Act, which is trying to just put a blanket ban on betting on war. There's HR 7004, which goes right after federal officials who trade on inside policy info, and the Prediction Markets Act, which tries to give oversight of these platforms back to the states. It's really a multi-front effort to try and close all these loopholes. And this is a really big but, all these reform efforts are facing a pretty serious complication, a potential conflict of interest that goes right to the top. Donald Trump Jr. is an advisor to Polymarket, which is one of the biggest platforms involved here. On top of that, the administration also dropped 2 federal investigations into the platform, which really makes you question if there's any political will to enforce any new rules. So let's just connect the dots here. We've got trades that perfectly predict war-altering announcements. We have a new digital casino where it looks like national security secrets are being turned into cash in real time. And when you put it all together, it leads you to a really fundamental and honestly a deeply disturbing question. When war becomes this profitable, who out there really has an incentive for peace?